For the last 7 or 8 years, I've been working in the clean tech space, helping teams that can grow to be businesses, but also solve the problem of global warming and climate change. I think more and more big corporates are starting to realise that it's more than just profit, it's about the world we live in. Being an entrepreneur is not something you learn through going to a classroom. It's something you do with your own business, and you do it in real time. There's those ideas that can actually mitigate climate change and help reverse it. But then there's some ideas that say, you know what, it's going to happen.
You and I have worked together for about 6 years now?
6 or 7 years, yeah, absolutely.
A long time.
Yeah.
And through Imperial College here in London, the EIT Climate Kick. And I'd like to actually hear from you where you were before you started working for the Climate Kick, and how you started working in the Climate Kick, and what's happened since then, and where you are right now, and what you want to do for the future, all of that. So
sure.
Not all at once,
yeah.
but
Let's get into that. So, yeah, I mean, I guess I started out in the software business. So I spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley, in software companies and systems integration companies, and kind of learnt the Californian way of doing business, selling the vision, making sure people understood the real problem you're solving. And there's a certain sense of show business that goes along with that. And I learnt that at a very early age. Went through into senior management, commercial roles, and then got involved in IPOs. So part of the founding team, and came out with 3 IPOs, 2 on NASDAQ, 1 on London Stock Exchange.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Period. So it's quite a kind of, and also a stack of failures. You know, there's a bunch of companies that I worked for that didn't work out. And I guess I've almost learnt more from those than I did from the ones that were amazing successes.
I can imagine.
And then I went into management consulting and worked for some very big corporates in terms of turnarounds and helping them to reposition, doing M&A work and that type of thing. And then for the last 7 or 8 years, I've been working in the clean tech space. And that's really kind of where my passion is helping teams that can grow to be businesses and make money, but also solve the problem of global warming and climate change. And you know, it's such a massive issue. It's, for me, one of the chief issues of our time, chief challenges that we need to address. And so helping these startups to grow, to find their investment, to get out into the world and make a difference kind of makes me very proud of them. And so that's where I've ended up today. And I use all my experience of having been an entrepreneur myself to help them put their best foot forward. And of course, working with you is an amazing part of that. I mean, I think we both share that joy in seeing these startups be successful.
Yeah, that's right. And I you know, you and I, when you started the program, it was just before we started working together. I came in on your first intake of startups. Is that correct?
That's right. I mean, I remember to this day sat in the very first venture competition with Marianne Heikamp from a Dutch office, and each time a startup came on the stage, I would comment to Marianne. I said, "Oh, yeah, that's a really good one there." Then there'd be not such a good one. I said, "That's a good one as well." And she leant over to me and she said, "You know, all the ones that you're saying are really good ones are the one that Beth's coached. You know, I really must introduce you." And I think that's when we first started working together.
That's right, because I was living in Amsterdam at the time and working. I worked a little bit with the Dutch EIT Climate Kick office too. And then what happened is they then contracted me to work for them across Europe in all the different countries across Europe for the Climate Kick. And so you contacted me, I think it was, and then we started working together. And it was your first intake of like 30 teams. I think that we
was that 2012, 2013, I guess?
2012, I think, was the very first, to 2013, right? And since then, you know, we've worked together every year, I mean, since then. And with you have 3 intakes a year now, right?
Yeah, 2 to 3. It varies depending on funding. I mean, in total, since we first started working together, the UK program's seen about 90 startups go through the program.
90?
Yeah, something like that. 86, 89, something like that.
And how much money on average do you think the startups have raised?
Well, the ones that have completed the program, and there's around about 50 that have completed the program, gone all the way through. They've raised between them $170 million now.
Yeah.
And there's still teams that are still going through the program. So it's a pretty high conversion rate. I mean, we're seeing about 75% conversion rate of teams that come in to then go through and make it into a business.
What's interesting about your program, the EIT Climate Kick has funded like 6 countries to be the centers. They're called the co-location centers for several countries to come and train different startups. And for the UK, you had the UK plus Ireland, right? Ireland and the UK?
UK and Ireland and Scotland have recently joined as well.
Yes.
So, yeah.
So, and what I found, because I've worked with many different accelerators across Europe and South Africa, in Silicon Valley, Brazil, all over, and what I found about your program is that the way you used the funding and the way you structured your program was extremely effective, the most effective program that I'd seen, not just for clean tech, but for any sort of technology because I work with med tech and biotech,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah.
But you have a higher success rate in how you structured your program and the mentoring that you've given them and the length of time you've allowed them to stay in the program. So if you could explain, normally a lot of the programs I work with, it's 3 months.
Yeah.
They go 12 weeks, sometimes 6 months. The organization that funds them sometimes takes some equity if they help them raise just a little bit of money. It's a lot of equity sometimes for a little bit. They take like 8% sometimes for 15,000 euros. I don't know. It's really something I don't suggest that people agree to. But anyway, and in yours, it was funded by the Climate Kick, as I said, which is European funding, Horizon 2020. But then you've structured your program in a way that has been, in my view, extremely effective. And you have so many successful clean tech companies that come out of your program, and I know that the Chinese were interested in your model and brought you to China a few years ago to see if you
went
could.
to Shanghai, to Carbon Valley. Yeah.
Right, because they had like $75 billion to spend on clean tech, and they wanted you to develop your model there. So if you could explain what you set up and how it's different from these other short-term programs.
Yeah, sure. I mean, time is a big part of it in the classical accelerator, and 75-80% of them are digital. In order to create a digital venture, you need a keyboard and a screen and an idea, and you can then bounce that off customers. You can iterate very rapidly. So having an accelerator program that's only 3 months long kind of works because actually you can have screens that just look good. They don't have to do anything other than guide the consumer to the web app or the app that they're doing and make it feel like they're immersed in an environment. You can do that very quickly. But with clean tech, usually there's a piece of tech there. It might be a piece of chemistry, it might be some engineering, it might be some electronics. So there's a larger amount of time to convert that intellectual property into a prototype that an investor can see has a commercial potential. So there's that amount of time for the technical development. But then there's also, it's a new market. Digital has been around, it's been around for quite a while actually. I mean, since the 50s, the 60s, we've had computing and we've got used to different applications for computing. But it's only very recently that people have suddenly woke up to the fact that we need to do something about the climate, that we need to decarbonize. And therefore there is a need for products that aren't necessarily the cheapest, but are very effective in doing what they're doing, but do it in a sustainable way that provides for a better future. And
give me your definition of sustainable.
Sustainable. Well, it's businesses have to make profit. They have to be sustainable as a business, but they also have to think about the environment, the people, and there's this triple bottom line thing. There's the social impact.
Right.
And I think more and more big corporates are starting to realise that it's more than just profit. It's about the world we live in.
Right.
And so for me, sustainability is on a lot of different levels. And I guess that's one thing I love about our startups is that they all have this passion to do something good, not just as a business, but for the society in which they live in.
Right.
And so there's the time that it takes, because it's a new market, and they've got to understand the needs of the customers, the segments of that market, what makes them tick, and maybe what latent needs they have that they didn't know they had, that they've got to uncover all of this. And so that takes them more time. And so what we've done is we've structured the program such that it's pretty much open-ended. They can take the time they need so that they do more pivots and they get to the model that is more likely going to work with the target customers that they have. One really interesting example, do you remember the team Coheat?
Oh, yes.
They applied to the program. Yeah, fantastic team.
Yeah.
And their first idea was a shower where
Right.
it collects the water from the shower. And there's heat in the water that's just going down the plug hole, and they recycled that heat so that you wouldn't
have hot
use
water.
Yeah, you'd have hot water and you wouldn't be using so much heat. And they went off and talked to a load of people, and went to a big builder and said, what do you think of this idea for your new homes? And they said, it's not very good, but if you had a community heating system, that would be fantastic. We'd buy one tomorrow. So they kind of thought about this and pivoted to where the opportunity was. And in some ways that's a good thing, because you've got to follow where the need is.
Right.
And that's an example of where a company went through the program, they pivoted, but they came up with an idea that was really valued.
Right. And they're doing well.
And they're doing well. But that comes back to time. If you're in a 3-month program, you would miss that, and then you come to the end of the program and you think, what, we didn't make it work, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Whereas if you have more time, you're able to come out with a result. And I think that's the difference between ours and other programs.
Right. Well, and I think another difference, that's true. That's one main difference. I think the other difference that I've seen, because I've worked with just, 20, 30 different accelerators around the world, at least, maybe more, is that you've got yours phased. So you have 3 stages. So you bring them in, and they've got their idea. They may or may not have a proof of concept. So you basically are bringing them in. You're helping them to train to sort of understand what's required, and then you're sort of testing them to see if they're ready to go to the next phase, and they understand what the phases require. So they have a picture of the whole of the requirements. That's a roadmap of what the steps they need to take in order to get to the market. And you actually give them funding that is a little bit at first, a little bit more second, and then much more when they're setting up the business to go out to the market, right? And so you've divided the money that the government's given you into 3 phases. So you've structured it this way in a way that I find it's over lots of the companies take, you said it's open-ended, but they take 18 months, 2 years. This has been my experience, because I come in, I coach them. You brought me in twice at least to coach them in the beginning, and then maybe later on, or for they have the competitions Europe-wide to compete against other clean tech companies that are in this program across Europe. I coach those companies, but that I think also is what matters, because if you just had the time and you didn't have the structure that allows them to get the tools that they need, the reason I think that what you do and what I do works so well together is because in a longer-term, larger program, you do exactly what I do in a shorter-term, 2-day, 3-day program that I bring to the companies at different points along the way, along their path, and that is you basically help them understand who they need to talk to, to articulate the problem, get the solution, but you give them the tools and the feedback to sort of understand from people that are experts in their field, to understand what they need, what's missing, and what they need to work on, and then you give them the next phase so that they can get the practice of getting to the next stage, where they might might need to develop their prototype, get a pilot going in the second phase, for instance, and go out to the market more. And then the third phase is basically scaling it to the market and getting their own office and setting themselves up into a business, right? But they've had mentoring all the way along with the business model. They get my pitch coaching. It's really it's complete, because you're bringing in people from industry for them. You're bringing in technical experts. You're bringing in someone like, I'm from Silicon Valley and from Europe. The last 6 years I'm in Europe, but it's like you're getting people in who actually can help them with giving them feedback from what really matters, what works, what doesn't work. And I find that there's many accelerators out there and incubators, but they may not understand what actually is necessary to sort of support these people accurately, so that they can actually survive and thrive once they hit the market.
It's not a theoretical exercise.
No.
I mean, you know as well as I do, we've both been in business, we've been entrepreneurs, that being an entrepreneur is not something you learn through going to a classroom. It's something you do with your own business. You do it in real time, and so you kind of have to accept that's what the way to work with an entrepreneur. So therefore, if you give them support along the way and you make little interventions at each step along the journey and you're with them, then you're more likely to get a successful outcome for them.
Right.
And
which is what the Chinese recognized when they brought you over. So what was it they were interested in you doing for them?
Well, there's a few pieces for them. The structure of stage one, where you and I worked closely together, was really good, because you get the basics like the business model, you get the ability to communicate that, you get mentors to test, have you got the right kind of business model that makes some sense, is it commercially viable? So you can do the basics, then you come in, you make sure you wrap all that up so that it communicates it beautifully, it's succinct, it's understandable, and instead of speaking about their technology, they speak to their audience.
Exactly.
And that is a huge part, because often they miss that, especially if they've come from a scientific background where they've been doing stuff in a lab. They might never have done communication skills.
Right.
So for me, the Chinese were very interested in the structure of stage one. But probably more importantly, the bit that they don't do in China very much is engaging with the market in the way that we do in the West, and taking customer feedback, turning that into product iterations or strategy iterations.
The flow of the information.
The flow of the information and the pivots that you do. And so they were very interested in, what is a pivot and how do you make sure it's the right pivot? And of course, there's no golden rule around that. It's just a case of working with each startup and understanding and helping them make the right decisions along the way.
Right. So it's to some extent it's a trial and an error process, but it's an educated and calculated trial and error.
Exactly.
That's
that.
right.
Yeah. And I think, for you and I as entrepreneurs, we have an instinct as well, so we can bring that to bear, and then all of the other mentors that are in the program can also give perspectives and opinions. And the poor startup, they have so much advice that
that's right.
They sometimes a little overwhelming.
Yeah, that's true.
But then the final part that I think is a really important part of the overall process is that they usually realise when they've got the market feedback that to get this whole thing off the ground, they've got to get some money. They can't avoid the situation where fundraising doesn't have to happen. Sure, there's some useful government grants along the way, and often teams will go for those, but you do have to win investment. And so we set that as the final hurdle in the program, that once you've won investment, a significant amount of investment from a private equity or angel, then you qualify for the Stage 3 award. So it's more like a little bonus for having achieved your final milestone.
Right.
And again, I think the Chinese are very interested in that. It's not a case of just giving the money away. It's a case of achieving something and being rewarded for achieving.
Right. But and giving them the right training tools and exposure and networking in order to achieve that. Because what I found with you also is that you have your finger on the pulse of all the venture capitalists in London, for instance, and all the accelerators in London, who's doing what. I mean, you know that what's happening out there, and so you invite them in. To hear them, invite the venture capitalists, for instance, in to hear your startups and connect them with the right people. So you're really good at the network and connecting.
You know, I don't think I've told you about this, but we've got an incredible event coming up in 3 weeks' time. We're doing a speed dating session. So we call it a 10 by 10 speed dating. We have 10 startups, 10 investors, and we sent out a profile listing on our platform of the startup and say to the investors, pick the 6 that you're most interested in meeting, and then we set up a personal itinerary. Everybody comes along. They have a 20-minute meeting. We ring a gong. They all move around to the next meeting, and it's a great way of connecting investors with startups.
Right.
So I'm very excited to be running.
Yeah.
That as
No.
a
I mean,
format.
actually, you just sent me an email about it just as you were walking in, so I just quickly saw it because I'm going to be working with the teams. To sort of coach them, and you wrote me the email to explain that it's not my sort of typical pitch to investors because they only have a certain amount of this short amount of time, and they have like 20 seconds or 1 minute maximum. Sort of explain who they are, and the way you describe what they're looking for, it helps me to sort of hone my focus so that I'll be able to really ask them to. Talk about what the problem is, their solution, what traction they have, how much money have they raised, how much are they looking for, and they have to say it really, really quickly.
Yeah. And you're amazing at that type of thing because the way you're able to get them to précis their content into a fast, snappy, confident expression, it just kicks off the meeting brilliantly. And we've worked on a number of formats together. The sort of 1 minute elevator pitch or this modified speed dating introduction,
Right.
Is a great way to help the start, because they have to do it in real life when they're networking.
Right.
They see somebody at a party. You have a minute and you just want to get to a card swap and move on to the next
Right.
one.
And what I tell, that minute is much more difficult to get to than a half an hour talk.
Yeah.
Because a half an hour talk, you can be self-indulgent. You can sort of just not have to focus and get clarity about this is what I need to say, this is what I have to cut out. You can sort of put everything in there in half an hour talk, 20-minute talk. When you have 1 minute, you have to really decide what's the key thing that I need to say in 1 minute to get them to be interested to talk to me afterwards.
It needs to be natural, it needs to be positive.
Right.
And that's a wonderful skill you have to bring that out from the teams.
Thank you.
And the 5 minute piece is important as well, isn't it? Because that's then the pitch to a bigger audience, a little bit more time. But again, 5 minutes is not enough time.
No.
And it has to be punchy, it has to be
Right.
amazing.
It does.
To really beat the competition.
Right. I know the majority of the time they have 5 minutes to pitch when we work together over the last number of years. But I always include the 1 minute pitch in my training, so my coaching, so that they first have to stand up and give a 1 minute pitch before I go into what to say, what not to say, and how to say it, and then they get up and do their 5 minute pitch with their slides. But the 1 minute pitch, that it's an ability to crystallize the value of what you're doing succinctly, put the right numbers in there so they understand the impact by having your metrics correct,
Yeah.
and then delivering it in a way that's confident and passionate about, so that people listening to you immediately want to respond. And the fact is, you're doing it with the speed dating, but they'll be able to take that and should be able to repeat themselves in any setting.
It's a skill they can use
for everything. Right.
It's all down to the right form of communication, the right message, understanding their audience,
Right.
and executing on that. And
That's
doing
exactly
a really
right.
good job.
It's executing is really, really important. So, so tell me, Andrew, what now for the Climate Kick and for you going forward? What do you sort of envision? You've also developed this marketplace for investors in clean tech companies. I've seen that. I think is fabulous. So, just explain a little bit about that, and then also what else you have in mind.
Well, the marketplace is just a way of connecting investors across more countries and more geographies. What does tend to happen is things get localized. So we have a big, very successful cluster in London, But there are also clusters in Berlin and in Paris and across the cities
Clean
in
tech
Europe.
clusters.
Clean tech clusters, but also digital as well, and all of the other disciplines. And by creating a platform where we can put all of the clean tech, climate-oriented startups across the network into one common platform, we can gain better visibility of the startups to investors in other countries. So it's a way of just sort of raising the bar on deal flow and also marketing for the startups.
And what's the link for it? What's it called to find the marketplace?
It's the climate-kick.org/marketplace.
Okay.
Is the link.
So
great place to go and just check out how to visualize and search for startups that meet your criteria.
Yeah. So when you told me that you developed it, I looked at it and I was going, "Whoa, this is really, really good. It'd be so good for like all of my clients because I cross all technologies with my clients. It'd be so great to be able to have, because I meet so many different startups with different investors across so many different countries, and they're venture capitalists are always looking for deal flow, and startups are always looking for investors that could be interested. It'd be great if I could create something similar or connect to yours, so that we could then
I think we should do it, Beth.
cross-pollinate.
I think
Yeah.
it'd be, there is a real need out there for investors to have access to early stage deals, and there's a lot of platforms that give the later stage deals.
Yeah.
But we should do that.
We should do that. It's not just early stage deals. It's early stage deals that are really pre-qualified.
Yeah.
They've been
Quality deal
the
flow,
quality
yeah.
deals. See, because there's lots of early stage deals out there, but the companies that come through your program and through the other programs of the accelerators that I work with that are across Europe that I've worked with are really really high quality already because they've gone through a screening process. So the investors can have these pre-screened high quality companies to look at, and I think it just makes it easier for them, and it makes it easier for the companies that are trying to raise money.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
I mean, the other thing that we're doing, which I think is very different, is this notion of co-location, where you can bring all of the various pieces together in one place. And the new campus we have in White City in West London, we've got plans for a much larger facility where we can have the startups with laboratories, with prototype space. We can have the incubator space, but we can also bring in the investors. We can bring in technical experts and scientists and create much more of a localized cluster. And we've found that a lot of incubation zones across Europe and other parts of the world see London as a fantastic global city for bringing innovation to. So that's something that we're very excited about.
Yeah.
So the idea of the marketplace and also the hub are two big parts of where we see our future.
And Europe versus Silicon Valley, how do you see clean tech in Europe versus Silicon Valley in terms of competitiveness, quality of startups, funding, all of that?
Well, I think with Trump at the moment, it's kind of clean tech isn't really doing much at the moment. The investment's gone down, and it's such a shame because I think until a few years ago, there was a real sense that America wanted to invest heavily in clean tech and was going to do something big, but we've seen it tail off in the last couple of years with the current policies. So I think Europe and Asia are probably doing more, but I would imagine in a couple of years' time, who knows what's going to happen. What I do know is that Silicon Valley move very fast, and they can really move mountains. So I think the more people that are doing this thing, the better, because it is a global problem we're trying to address, and it's one planet, we all live on it. So the more every country can do, the better.
Right, but I also feel like in Europe that because there's agreement across Europe that climate change is real, and that it's important, it's urgent to do something about it now. So you've got sort of like mind across Europe, UK and the rest of Europe, to take action on it. And so, my impression is. Even before sort of the Trump situation, that clean tech, they were doing things in the U.S., but I always had the impression that in Europe they were actually doing more, and because a society values it and supports it equally across
All
of Europe.
Yeah,
And
I remember one of my very early experiences with the Climate Kick teams, they're explaining to me that actually, if you look at the major European cities, a lot of them are on rivers. You look at Paris on the Seine, and London on the Thames, Amsterdam on the Amstel.
Right.
It doesn't take much sea level rise, and some of our major cities are actually in trouble.
Yeah.
So it is very pertinent to Europe, and it's a different impact from climate change to other areas of the world where we see, wildfires or tornadoes or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
But Europe is very vulnerable. So it has this social desire to actually do something about it, which is great.
It's a combination, from my view, of a social desire combined with money. So they're giving resources, money, people like you, to people who know what they're doing, to sort of create new things, but then also the cross-pollination of ideas across Europe, I think, is happening in a way that it's amazing. I really am thrilled to be here working in this environment, because people always say, well, how come you're here, not in Silicon Valley? But I find that Europeans have achieved so much, and one of the key issues for them to sort of find their place in the world is that they are quite modest about communicating their achievements. And so what I can help is to
absolutely,
improve the impact of that communication, and also the value of the agreement of social agreements across all these different countries in Europe that support the improvement of the climate situation, is like just certain basic values that they agree to. You don't have to fight about them, argue about them like they do in the States.
Yeah, it's commonly accepted.
It's accepted across Europe.
Yeah.
Makes it so much easier to sort of move things forward here. That's what I found.
And that's one of the wonderful things I find about running a masterclass, for instance, is that we hosted one on hiring high impact team members a few weeks ago. And so we had people from all of the different Climate Kick offices and countries coming into London.
And how many offices were there?
Berlin was very well represented. Paris was, the Spanish offices, some of the Italian offices. I mean, actually, it was a good spread. We had about 40 people.
Yeah.
And there's this common belief there's this common culture of doing something good, which always strikes me when you get the international groups together. That's the thing that unites them.
That's right. There's an agreement, there's an alignment of values, and then you have the resource put to it, and then you take the action. So, which makes me hopeful for the world, because Europe, even though I know there's lots of issues in Europe about lots of different things, but basically there's certain things that are like this that are really agreed to, supported, and acted on.
That's one of the good things. That's absolutely true.
Yeah, and so it's sort of like fighting the good fight. When you're in your intake process, what are the key things that you look for in a company?
Do you know, that's a really good question, and there's two things, and then there's another six. So I'll talk about the two first. So the first is we've got to have the right people, and what we mean by that is people that are able to listen and take feedback, take advice, absorb the environment and the thoughts that they're within. If they're not able to listen, then they just carry on with their idea. They don't change it, and more likely than not, they'll make a mistake. So,
and I call it being coachable. I need people who are coachable.
Being coachable.
And for me too.
That.
I don't work with people who aren't coachable because it's a waste of energy and effort. Yeah.
And it's a difficult trait to spot, because you're sort of interviewing somebody and you're just trying to work out how open they are.
Yeah.
So that's one thing we look for, and there's another whole layer of people things. Are they the right type of people to actually make a business? Can they make it happen? So we look for that type of thing. But then we also look for the idea. Is this an idea that can fly? Is there really going to be a market? And sometimes, you think, actually, it's not great, but if we modified that bit, and we influenced them to move to that market, it would work. So we're less precious about the idea, more about the people.
Right. Right, so that's a very good point, because who's on the team is almost more important than what the idea is. Because if they have some kernel of an idea, that if the team's coachable and you've got the right people on the team, or they recognize they need to add certain people if they're missing a few, then you can sort of work with them to sort of massage it, sort of tailor it, so that, or edit it, or recreate it, or pivot, so that you can create something that actually is amazing. So that was what I was going to ask. Does it, if they don't have a decent idea, but the team is amazing, would you still take them in?
The idea's got to have something about it. So what we look for is it's got to have at least a scalable option. It's got to have a scalable business model. It's typically we like to see that there's some IP, there's something very special, there's some really interesting piece of that. It might be a patent, it might be a piece of tech, but if it's just a simple idea with nothing special, we typically don't take those on. We look for something that we think can be successful as well, and that's when gut feel comes into it. But do we really think there's a market out there for this?
Right.
So it's got to be grounded in a business. We look for something that's got to have a climate change impact. So clearly, we want to do something for the planet. So if it does scale, if it is successful, then in turn it will make a difference.
Right.
Team obviously is the other factor. So they're the main things that we look for.
So I've seen across the course of the years that you've taken on some teams that are they have a very sort of practical application, or it's hardware, or because it's a different type of solar panel, or a different shape of solar panel, or a new coating for the wind blades, so something very concrete. But I've also seen you support people like Tim Kruger, who have ideas about how to sequester CO2 that are like really so it's very way out there, right? In terms of being really far from actually being able to happen, but that he's on a path that could possibly get us there in a number of years. So it looks like you've got a combination of teams that have a shorter term impact and then have a much longer term impact. Is that true?
Absolutely. Yeah. We sort of spread our bets so that there's some long term solutions that could have a massive impact. There's some short-term things that give quick gains, and then there's the two sides of climate change. There's those ideas that can actually mitigate climate change and help reverse it, but then there's some ideas that say, you know what, it's going to happen, and we need to prepare for the fact that it's going to happen. So we call those climate adaptation ideas, where it's slightly depressing, but you accept that it's happening, but these ideas will make it easier and they'll help one adjust. So, for example, we have some teams that do genetic editing for foodstuffs, so that we can grow the food that humanity needs in a world where we have less land because the land's been burnt away. In fact, I know the European Union voted or the European Court of Justice said that we shouldn't be doing that in Europe anymore. But it's a big thing for populations in China and India, the rest of the world, where if climate change does happen, then we need to do something about it. So we have all sorts of different ideas.
Or use 90% less water, like there's one company called Dry Grow. Dry Grow is Charlie Curtis, right?
Yeah.
Was that Tim Kruger originally also?
That was Tim as well. So Tim has been involved in two.
And Chess, and then Sean. I forget Sean's last name, but
Sean Peters.
Yeah, Sean Peters, the CEO. So they've got Dry Grow, which you can grow food with 90% less water, right?
Yeah, 99% less water.
Oh, 99% less water, excuse me.
Isn't that incredible? So, desert environment, you can be growing salads, tomatoes, things like that. They're doing a fantastic trial, I think, in Kenya right now, where people who haven't been able to grow this food are suddenly having fresh salads to be able to eat. So it's inspirational stuff.
So this morning I talked to someone, to actually Jonathan Risley, who actually gets drinking water out of thin air.
Yep.
That was one of your comments. And then Kate Hoffman, I talked to her, and she has grows food from an urban environment. So, I mean, there's all, and then Tim with Chess, Tim Kruger with Chess, has this sort of big idea about how to save the planet and sequestering
generate power, but also take carbon dioxide out
out
of the
atmosphere, right?
at the same time. So it's
Right.
actually a carbon negative technology.
Right. And then there was, I guess it was out of Switzerland, it was the Climate Kick, but there's Carbon Delta, and there was a company that is looking at sort of the financial markets to try and index how. Oh, there's Index.
ET Index.
ET Index, which
See,
is
that's
yours.
a great commercial idea in that they've got an algorithm that helps to look at carbon intensity in a portfolio, an investment portfolio, and you can get great returns but reduce the carbon intensity. And in so doing, it helps investors think about where they want to put their money. Do they want to put their money in things that are just burning the planet, or into things that will do good for the planet,
Right.
but without sacrificing any return. So they can reduce their carbon risk, they can increase their returns. And what that does is it starts moving money across the stock markets into things that are more important that we invest in.
Right.
And I think that's why we're seeing some traditional markets start to slide. There's a real sea change now with the transition to a low carbon economy. So they're a great example of how it doesn't have to be tech, it can be finance.
Exactly, right.
Yeah.
So the whole range of programs that you've supported and startups that you've supported cover everything that you could possibly think of. I think about what we need to think to implement and develop in order to save the planet. So it really gives me a sense of. It's very gratifying for me because I'm trying to help as many people as possible, do as much good as possible for as many people as possible quickly, and who you are and what you're doing helps me do that in a sort of exponential way.
Well, I'm so pleased to work with you because, in some ways we both have children. We both want to leave the planet in a better place
That's
than
right.
we had it. And so it's good for us both to do something good,
Right,
isn't it?
I know. It's been great. So thank you very much, Andrew.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you
you.
very much.